Wallala 88.3 FM. I'm Peggy Berryhill, and I have a special guest this morning. I am so excited. A journalist is here with me, Peter Byrne. He's probably embarrassed for me to call him that, but come on, you can relax a little, Peter. You don't have to. He looks like we've got him stuck up there on a stick. We're going to talk to him in just a moment. He's written some amazing articles. Some of you may have read some of them in the Bohemian. We're going to talk about them and what what his career has been like. First, I want to tell you it's 55 degrees out. It's actually somewhat clear for the first time. We have a steady wind of 5 miles per hour and gusts at 7 miles per hour. And our projected high is 65. Wow. Well, it is July, isn't it? The end of July. So it could happen. It could happen. Anyway, let me give you a couple of quick community announcements. Farmers markets are back and happening again. On Friday, the Point Arena Farmers Market is from 3 to 6 in the parking lot of what used to be the general store on Main Street. On Saturday, the Gualala Farmers Market from 9:30 to 12, where you can get so many great greens and baked goods from Alan and Astrid. Hogel Astrid is just one of the best bakers, and there's olive oils, all kinds of wonderful things. Also on Saturday, oh, and that's at the Gualala Community Center. Also on Saturday, Goodbye Close in Point Arena from 9:30 to 3:30 at 245 Main Street. And then music in on Saturday from 11 to 4 at Linden Design Gallery on Annapolis Road in the Sea Ranch, and an exhibit. I'm sorry, this is not exhibit, not music, art exhibit featuring the ceramic figures of Lita Davis. And then we get to music at the Dolphin Gallery, which is right here at Cypress Village, just across the way, and right on Highway 1, 12 to 2, with Harrison Goldberg and Chris Doring. Always fun to hear those guys, great musicians. And Saturday night, blues and jazz with Earl Oliver at the Noyo River Grill. Well, that's up in Fort Bragg. How about that? All right, that's it. I'm going to stop right there. And just a couple of words for those of you, I watched and some of you listened to the first day of the hearings about January 6th yesterday. And it was so poignant, so hard to listen to, and so hard to watch these officers as they recounted. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. There were 9,000 terrorists and only 140 Capitol Police officers. And these four officers, one of them is the one you've seen over and over again in TV, who was crushed in that doorway and beaten over and over again. Uh, they, what they had to say, how they fought for their lives. But the thing that I was struck by as well was how each one of them said, "We fought for you." And they pointed to the senators, the Congress people. They said, "We fought for you. We fought for this nation. We fought for the Constitution, and we fought for the future of this nation." One of them was an Iraq veteran. He said he'd never experienced anything like this in his life. He was from Dominican Republic, and he was told, "You're not an American, get out of here." Two of the officers that testified were white. They described this group of people as white supremacists. When they were asked them or told them to leave, they were told, "No, you need to leave. You're the traitors. This is our house. President Trump invited us here. You don't belong." And another officer who was black, and he was repeatedly called an N. And they said, we're here to protect because of the lie. Biden isn't president. Nobody voted for him. And the same officer said, "Well, I voted for Biden." And at that point, the crowd surged, and he said people started chanting, "Kill the N. He voted for Biden. Kill the N. He voted for Biden." And so these kinds of things that we heard over and over again during the hearings, that it was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, not only just in watching these four men who were doing their job and what they went through. Heartbreaking to think that there's a whole half of our Congress who just refuses to acknowledge that this even happened, who says, oh, it's just a normal day. And, lots of tourists, no big deal. And who are perpetuating the big lie. So, we're in such a dangerous place, I think, in America. I'm not white, you know that. I've lived my life in this nation my whole life. I know what it's like out there. Also a woman. So I know what the reality is out there, what we face, and how we have to carry ourselves. And suddenly to see all of this looking at in real for real. This is for real. This is no play. This is not made up. This happened and is happening all over our country. And I couldn't help but wonder, where were you? Do you remember where you were on that day when this insurrection happened? I know exactly where I was, and I was in actually Windsor. Susan was in a Lowe's store, and she came running out and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "I don't know what's going on," but she says, "All those white men in there, it was dangerous. I was scared to be there." And she came and I said, "I just turned on the radio and I just heard what's going on." And then we watched it on our phones and we got back to the coast as quickly as we could. That was the effect it had on us. It scared us. And the fact that it was already spreading this white supremacy feeling, this patriarchal feeling, was evident. And we have to stop this, all of us together. We'll be talking about more of this. You know why we're here at KGUA, and you know that it's important for all of us in our world, to our little tiny beautiful part of the world, why we live here, not just for the beauty, but we respect each other. We got to work together, folks. We can't let this nation be taken down by a few. And there's clearly, this is far from the end of this. All right, now take a breath. I want you to meet Peter Byrne. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Peggy.
Whoops. Try again.
Hi, Peggy.
There it is. Up. This mic
There we
doesn't want to
go.
stay up there. All right. And Peter is, I am so excited to meet Peter because Peter is, I'm calling him a journalist.
Oh, wow. That's more than I ever imagined I would be called. I've been called other things.
Judging on your writing, I'm sure that's true. Well, but we know Peter most recently from his series has been doing for the Bohemian, and it started with Unearthed, which we will talk about. I want to show you these covers. Unearthed, Bohemian, and these magazines are free, by the way, folks. This is next.
Yeah, Apocalypse Cow is next.
And we really want to talk about Apocalypse Cow, which has one of the oddest titles I've ever seen. And I couldn't figure out, what in the world are they? Apocalypse Cow.
It just happened.
As good headlines do. And then, of course, this one, what you've not only heard of, Tamal Huye with our friend Teresa Harlan Tiger, and she's been on the station. She's actually on my board, in full disclosure, our Native Media Resource Board. So we've had Teresa on, and thankfully Peter was listening, and he said, "Oh," when I said to Teresa, we'd like to have Peter on, and she said, well, he heard the interview and he said he'd agree to come on the air. So I'm glad. And then this is the most recent one in the Bohemian, in this whole series, Animal Sacrifice, the Fate of the Point Reyes Thule Elk. So how all these things intersect, we'll be talking about. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit to Peter about his background. As I looked up your information, your bio online, I was just awestruck. And as I said earlier, I won't embarrass you again. Well, yes, I will, and use that term, a journalist. He's a prolific writer. These articles each are not just a few paragraphs, so about 2,000 words?
5,000
words each. That's not easy, folks. I had to write a magazine story once that was 7,000 words. That was hard enough. So, you've taken on so many different topics. I mean, you can write about science, physics. You wrote about the breast cancer scare in Marin County, which is something maybe we'll have a chance to talk about, because there was a point in time not very long ago, 10 years ago or so, wasn't it, when it was considered to be a place, if you were a woman, that you were almost guaranteed to get breast
Well,
cancer.
the last 30 years, the constant media trope based on so-called scientific studies was that wealthy white women in Marin County were more at risk of breast cancer than women anywhere in the world. And
In the world.
in the world, and what I uncovered in my story was that the science was bogus. It was an artifact of wealthy white women getting more access to mammography, and that also the cancer registry of California, which is supposed to be the best one in the world, was full. I got their internal audits, was full of data mistakes and errors based on false premises, like wealthy white women get more breast cancer than anybody else. That made it not actually worthy of research. So, that was something that uh, was being obscured by manipulation by the Marin Department of Health and by these scientific organizations. Thankfully, after the piece came out, it was 30,000 words. It was an 11-part series in the Point Reyes Light newspaper. And it got the top science writing award of the year from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Those organizations actually that were promoting that false science were put out of business. Even the government couldn't keep giving them money. So that was like
That's great. It's major. That's important.
one of the few times when I've done a huge investigation where the government's actually responded to it in a way that was good for people.
I can't help but ask you if you thought about, with that kind of science and background and your prolific writing, talking about all of this craziness around the COVID vaccines.
I actually wrote an article not too long ago. I went to a town hall in San Rafael held by Congressman Jared Huffman, who's from our district and comes all the way up towards Gualala. And I was there because people were protesting against his position on Point Reyes. He's in favor of extending ranch leases there for 20 years. And as we'll probably get into later, that's not really a good idea from environmental and sociological points of view. Anyway, the elk people were there and they were going to put on their little antlers and jump up and down and demonstrate, right? And there was a handful of them. And I went there because I wanted to see what was happening. And then suddenly, like 300 people bum rushed the room. Anti-vaxxers, like because Huffman had actually said in the beginning that you had to have proof of vaccination to get into his hearing, right? And that incensed the local Republican Party, so they put out a call. And I swear, maybe 400 Caucasian people, there wasn't a person of color among them, with huge placards, stormed the room, attacked the stage. They were like on the cusp of some kind of January 6th insurrectionary violence, and they completely took over the meeting. Huffman, to his credit, and I disagree with him about any number of things in terms of environmental stuff, because I think he's a greenwasher. But to his credit, he actually went with the flow and actually addressed some of the issues and turned a situation that was potentially really terrible into something that was actually more revealing of these people than of anything else. And their core thing was that you will not take away my so-called freedoms by making me get vaccinated, like completely ignoring the fact that you get vaccinated not for yourself so much, but for like everybody, right? So that just like an X-ray into this political movement in our country showed that the utter selfishness and narcissism, that unfortunately infects a huge, portion of the people that live here. I mean, you were talking about January 6th hearings, it's like, that's the eye of the storm, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I have to stop you for just a second. I wanted to let you know that you not only can listen to this, you can watch us live on KGUA's YouTube channel right now. And so you can go to just put it in your browser, KGUA YouTube, and you can join us live. Thank you, Lee and Lindsay, for driving in the background and reminding us all of this. This whole I want to get back to what you're saying, and I do believe that January 6th is something that we cannot forget. We cannot let it be bypassed, as just an odd footnote, because I'm sure there's more brewing. But this whole thing of my rights that has risen to the surface, this narcissism somehow that you have the right to infect other people. And also the anti-science part, and that's really what I was getting to as well, into the breast cancer of rich women in Marin. Then I think serpentine, the rock, was even being blamed for some of that as well. But this whole idea, and by the way, I keep saying, by the way, we are back in a mask wearing requirement right here at the station. Masks are going to be required outside and possibly inside. If you're not vaccinated, you're not welcome here. It's just kind of that simple. And I have a niece in Montana who has been vaccinated, doing everything right. She has COVID for the second time. We know other people who are getting COVID for the second time, even if they've been vaxxed. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be vaxxed. You will, if you do get it, you're going to have symptoms, but not as bad. You're not going to die. Let me put it that way. Probably not. I can't guarantee anything. I'm not God or goddess.
Statistically, it's a no-brainer. I mean, get vaccinated, and people are not, contrary to some of the crazy fake news that's being promoted by some of the media. People are not dying from the vaccine. So, that's a whole nother story. But I think
that's a whole nother story. And nor are you going to become magnetized and, or chips are being put in your body. And if you have animals, have you ever been to the doctor when they put a chip in your animal? The needle is dang big.
Oh, no, I wouldn't do that to my animal. But I think it does bring up the more interesting question of, we talk about the people's freedom to not be vaccinated. I think the same thing applies to a lot about what I've been writing about in terms of Point Reyes in Marin County, is people think they have the freedom to farm in such a way that is detrimental to the fate of the earth. I mean, what kind of freedom is it to destroy Mother Earth? I don't think that's a freedom that people need to be allowed. And so that's what these articles really are about, is showing the factual basis for what's going on in super liberal, so-called progressive Marin County and at Point Reyes National Seashore, which is a lesson of how the earth is being destroyed in front of our very eyes under the guise of cultural preservation of white settlerism.
Exactly. And that's the classic battle that formed this nation once the cattle were brought from Spain. It was the cattle and the cattlemen and the sheep. I mean, this is the basis of a lot of Western movies, but it is that suddenly somehow cattle became the most important animal. The killing of the buffalo, maybe we don't all know that, but as Native people, we all know that, which are one of the healthier things you could eat and breed. And now they're brought back in very select small packs, some by tribes, but they're healthy for you. In the same way, we want to talk about the elk and what they do for the earth. I worked for an organization in Montana, the Western Organization Resource Council, who worked with cattlemen to do a better job at feeding and taking care of the earth. These were people who did believe in sustainability, even as cattle ranchers, that there were better ways to farm and ranch and raise cattle. So this historic thing, and that really is to me and to people, other people, if you're reading it, the elk people, as you call them down in Point Reyes area, this whole thing that this cattle industry has supremacy, then this whole image that Marin County was, colonized by these white people and they became ranchers. And that's the whole history of Marin County and the Point Reyes area. Once again, these lies about history right here in our backyard. And it's one of the things I applaud you for your articles and bringing that history alive, bringing it back. And of course, for helping Teresa Harlan Tiger and what's going on now over at Laird's Landing, people trying to reclaim land in a positive way. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. By the way, this is Peggy's Place on KGUA in Gualala, 88.3 FM. You may be watching us live on YouTube. That's right. Hey, we're real people here. You could be listening to us on the internet via the I've forgotten the apps, TuneIn app, Radio Garden, and our very own Air Pocket app, which you can download and take us with you wherever you live. And I do know we have listeners around the nation listening to this as well. So it's important to understand this beautiful area that we live in, who lived here before, where they went. Some of them are still here, thank goodness. But what's happening now at this time when we have a lot of people looking a bit more inward and outward in a much more holistic way? How do we live better on the earth? Are we going to be able to live lightly on the earth? I just read a horrifying article this morning about how noise pollution is killing the ocean grasses.
Wow.
And when you think about our impact in the short time we as humans have been on Earth, what we have done, can we turn some of this around?
Well, even just the last 300 years. I mean, indigenous people came here 10 to 20,000 years ago when the seas were much lower than they are now. You could actually walk to the Farallon Islands from here.
Really? I didn't know
30
that.
miles. Yeah. And then the seas began to rise as the glaciers melted, as the last ice age came to an end. The waters rose. And so if you took a submarine out here off the coast of Gualala, the coast here, you can find all sorts of probably archaeological treasures from peoples that inhabited the coastline tens of thousands of years ago. But we don't know about that. The National Park Service and, the kind of settler culture that we live in doesn't think that life began until 1776.
Isn't that the absolute truth? I'm a Muskogee member of the Muskogee Nation. We originally came from, who knows, Alabama, Georgia. We don't know because we were removed. But my dad used to tell me stories when I was a little girl about these people who came in canoes, and they had dark skin and they traded with them. They could have come from Cuba. They could have come from Mexico. We don't really know. But that proof, as you say, is probably somewhere on the bottom of the ocean, and or the Gulf of Mexico, more than likely.
Well, there's a lot of proof of what was happening historically at Point Reyes National. We got a problem here. At Point Reyes National Seashore, it's one of the most prolific archaeological treasures in the world. I mean, there literally are the remains of hundreds of villages and campsites throughout the Point Reyes Peninsula. There's ample evidence that's been looked at over the years showing that indigenous people lived there for at least 10,000 years in synergy with the environment, treating animals and rocks and trees and other humans as people. I mean, elk are people, rocks are people, trees are people. This makes a lot of sense. It didn't always make sense to me. Actually, I didn't even think about it that way until I started writing these things and talking to Native people. But unfortunately, as I expose in these articles, the National Park Service and the Department of Interior don't seem to care about that history at all. All they care about, at least at Point Reyes, is glorifying these dairy ranches that were established about 100, 150 years ago. And in the process, they've allowed cattle to trample on incredibly valuable, evocative indigenous archaeological sites, which is a whole story how the Park Service has operated to make sure that those sites are not elevated and protected in the same way that they're elevating and protecting these barns and and dairy ranches that aren't even ancient anymore. They're all modern. It's crazy.
The Coastal Commission just a few months ago also voted in favor of the cattle.
They
And
did, but that was a close vote, actually. It
yeah,
was 5-4. And it was revealed that Congressman Huffman, whom we spoke of earlier, called 5 of the members right before the vote and strongly lobbied them to vote in favor of keeping the cattle and having extended ranches. And 4 people didn't go for it, but 5 did, because they're, tend to be political appointees. And I think that gets to the core of the matter. What's driving the destruction of Point Reyes National Seashore is political. It's Jared Huffman and Dianne Feinstein and the Farm Bureau and the cattle ranching lobby, which is huge, and most people don't know about it. But most people have no idea that there's actually 1 billion cows on this planet. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against cows. They're people too, but they're slaves, and they're admit more methane gas, which is a very problematic greenhouse gas that causes global heating. It's worse in some ways than the carbon that comes from fossil fuels, because it lasts longer. And the amount that is emitted is just extraordinary. In fact, we could probably account for 30% of the greenhouse gases just from cows.
that's a lot.
There's not
That's a
only
huge
that,
lot.
they also poop a lot. 135 million pounds of poop every year at Point Reyes National Seashore, which is a national park, makes its way into the streams and then into the ocean. And it's basically full of E. coli and nitrogen, which extirpates the native plants of the area. I mean, it's an ecological disaster that is being glossed over by the Park Service.
I have an idea. Why don't we have the ranchers follow the cows with poop bags and pick up their poops?
I often think when I'm hiking in the local park that people that have horses should have to do that, because I have to pick up after my dog, right? But
but there's I will say in horses, their poop is more natural.
it is. You could,
Yeah, obviously I was being facetious, but I do about the poop bags. But I do. It horrifies me when I'm driving down the coast in Bodega Bay. There's a little creek north of 5 miles north of Bodega Bay, and where this cattle ranch, because the water flows right onto the beach, and there's a little creek, and you always see people letting their kids play in those creeks, and it horrifies me that they don't know what's going on.
The Park Service basically refuses to test the water at the ranches because
No,
they
I didn't
don't
know
want.
that.
Yeah, the ranchers are supposed to test it, but that's a state secret. And the Park Service is supposed to test it, but they rely on the county to do it. Now, an interesting anecdote is a few months ago, one of the environmental groups that is monitoring the situation did its own water testing in some key water courses inside the park, and discovered untenable amount of E. coli bacteria that was infecting beaches where children play. And so the activists that was part of paying for this scientific study came to the Department of Health in Marin County and said, here's this study, shouldn't we put up signs? And the person, it was under COVID, and so the person that was in charge didn't want to go out there, but they gave the activists some signs. So the activists went out and posted all these signs all over the park. E. coli warning off. They were official Marin County signs. And the Park Service the next day came and took them all down. The Park Service at Point Reyes National Seashore functions as a lobbyist group and an enabler for ranching. They have completely abandoned their legislated mandate to protect endemic species and to promote ecological health.
Don't they, though, have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the people who use those park areas?
Yeah, they do, but they're protecting the ranching industry. They don't seem to care about people that come there to recreate and whose children may be wading in one of the tidal pools down by Kehoe Beach or McClure's Beach, which is full of E. coli from cattle.
Let me remind you, you're listening to Peggy's Place this morning. Our guest is journalist Peter Byrne, whose articles you can read most recently in the Bohemian. And he has been studying, we're talking about now about the effect of cattle grazing down at Point Reyes. And you've been studying this for quite a while, the effect of cattle on the earth. Now, most people are going to tell you, come on, we all love hamburgers. We all love to eat beef. Why is this so wrong? Why shouldn't cattle be allowed to roam freely? And plus they're being pitted against Thule elk that may disappear.
Well, the whole thing about that is, in Marin County, which is actually one of the most segregated counties in the country,
Mhm.
and also one of the wealthiest and also one of the oldest, people like their grass-fed beef and they like their organic milk products. And so, to make a long story short, they spend a lot of time and energy in Marin County, quote unquote, protecting farmlands. So you can drive from where I live in Petaluma to Point Reyes, which is about 30 miles, through some of the most beautiful meadows and small hills and creeks that you can imagine. Now, what most people don't know is that those are all protected agricultural ranches, and when you drive, you see a lot of cows, and then you drive out to Point Reyes, which a third of it is given over to cattle ranching, and you see a lot of cows. Now, I've been going to Point Reyes for 30 years. I never really thought about this. I was like, oh, cows, okay. And then I see, like, you'd have a really nice meadow where there are no cows, and then you'd have this vast tract where there's this muddy kind of slurry full of nothing but poop, where there are cows behind barbed wire. And for some reason, it just never dawned on me that there was something wrong with that inside a national park. But then about a year ago, these activists that are trying to save Point Reyes, they have a website called Save Point Reyes. You can go there and find out a lot, including you can read my articles there, came to me and they said, would you write about this? And they gave me some of their information. And the thing that actually got me was the 135 million pounds of poop every year. I'm like, oh my God, that's really, like, if that's true, which I went and looked it up and found out that it was true, that's not right. And so that was a pulling on a string, and it all started to unravel after that, And in the course of it, I talked to indigenous people like Greg Saris of the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria, who we had some long conversations about these matters, and then ultimately Teresa Harlan, who we actually spent weeks together looking into the situation, of what happened to the native archaeology and how Teresa's family's home in a cove on Tamales Bay can be restored as an example of how to tend the earth. And so one thing led to another, but what happened for me was that I began to learn from indigenous traditions and from the indigenous people that I was talking to about, well, okay, rocks, trees, elk are people. That suddenly made sense to me. And then I began to think, well, does that mean, because there's a whole movement to turn public lands back over to indigenous management. The Atlantic had this huge article a few months ago about what all the national parks should be turned over to indigenous management, which I think is a pretty good idea. And I'll tell you why, for a number of reasons. It's not necessarily because I think so much that there are people of indigenous heritage that are necessarily better managers. It's the culture. It's what we know about how indigenous people, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, in Brazil, in Africa, and in England, for Ireland, where I'm from, where my ancestors are from, how people before industrial capitalism tended the earth. We did this for 2 million years. I mean, Cro-Magnons are not the nicest species that ever lived, but at least Cro-Magnons had this tradition of being one with the environment that they were in and not befouling it in such a way that the environment would do what it is now, which is turning against the humans. I mean, it's telling us to leave basically right now. Now, if we have the guts and the integrity to look at ourselves honestly and say, how did we get here? Then maybe we'll have like the smarts to figure out how to exit from there with something intact. Greg Sayers told me a really interesting story. I put it in Apocalypse Cows. He was the great friend of Mabel McKay, the Indian Miwok Pomo Dreamweaver, and spent a lot of time driving up and down the coast here, including through Guawala and Stewart's Point with her. And at one point, she looked out the car window and she said, "You know, Greg, I've had a dream that it's all going to burn. The oceans are going to dry up, and there's going to be fires, and everything is going to go dry." And Greg said, "Oh, Mabel, what should I do? What can I do to stop this?" And she looked at him and she laughed. He said, she mocked him and said, "Silly boy, you think you can stop this? No, all you can do is live the best that you can. And don't worry, the earth, it will be repopulated, but we don't know by who."
Oh, yeah. Mabel McKay from just south of here,
Yes.
Kashaya. By whom? That is a good question. And it does make you wonder. I've often thought similar thoughts about that. How what can we turn back? What can we stop? And in the short amount of time that we've done this, I'm considering myself as part of all of this too, on the earth, and there's so many pieces of it. And I mainly see, from the vantage point I'm at, indigenous people all over the globe fighting for water. That's the number one thing. Water is life. Without water, and it's it's a quandary. You know, we look at the pollution by, you're talking about these animals right now, cars, you know, the carbon and all of that. People tell me
military industrialism,
and the commercialization, and let's face it, that the corporate nature of all of these cattle all over the world. Everybody should eat beef, and beef replacing this, beef all over the world, and the corporate agriculture, all of that, which introduced so many chemicals as well. I don't know how you can undo that or how you can reclaim that, but I certainly know that there are a lot of indigenous people that have the knowledge still and know which plants belong and are going to help you and which aren't. So how I mean, that's a whole different story. How do we get to that point of listening and being able to be effective about it? Because we're also talking about governments.
Well, I think it's a mindset. It's a fundamental shift, you know, and I've felt it myself doing these articles. I mean, my family now, we're starting to like titrate off the beef, you know, and dairy a little bit is hard, you know. But the thing that I think most struck me about writing these articles was, before I wrote them, my major concern was that humans weren't going to survive. And now I'm less concerned about that, because I actually do have this really strong, it's almost a postmodern thing. I mean, it's interesting, like the postmodernists like Foucault and Michel Serres and Bruno Latour and people like this, who most people probably have never heard of.
We don't know. Could you tell us briefly?
Well, they're French philosophers over the last 40 years who have been arguing quite brilliantly the same thing that Mabel McKay was saying about people, you know, things, plants, sea anemones, elk. We're all people and we're all connected. And the postmodernist philosophers have basically taken the so-called rationality of the Enlightenment, which came around as a way of thinking when industrial capitalism was emerging in the 1600s and 1500s, and you know, you may have heard of Immanuel Kant and people like that. The idea was that human beings are the masters of the universe, and we can rationally discover how everything works just like a clock, and then we can mess with the innards of the clock and change it at will. Now, this unleashed settler colonialism and unleashed imperialist world wars. It's been a disastrous way of thinking tied to a mode of production, you know, industrial capitalism, monopoly capitalism. So, you know, can we conceive of a different way of doing things? Well, we've done it in the past. I mean, if you look at how indigenous people have always lived everywhere in the world in some kind of synchrony, you know, synchronous harmony with the environment, which is not to say bad things didn't happen, because of course they did, but they weren't, you know, destructive of the entire ecosystem, you know. So, you know, what I've learned here now, maybe is not to fear so much the extinction of human beings, because there will be people here.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't know who they are.
Well, and that's very true. I mean, and if you want to take the Christian point of view, they say the meek will inherit the earth. That sort of gives me a lot of faith and hope.
Well, that would be
Not that I'm Christian, that
bacteria.
would be meek.
Microbes and bacteria are the most successful life forms on the planet. They've been here for 4 billion years, and they'll definitely be feasting on us as we exit.
Well, there certainly is that aspect. Peter Byrne, I love having you here this morning and helping us think about all of this that is going on around us, the effects we have, and how we can change this. But I do want to bring you back to a question that I've had from some people who've read your articles and want to know, we've talked about poop. Let's talk a little about poop some more. Cow poop versus elk poop. What difference does that make to the earth in Point Reyes?
Well, elk poop tends to be in little pellets, and elk are grazers and browsers, so they wander. And under most conditions, unfortunately not at Point Reyes, they're unconfined. And so their poop tends to actually be regenerative to the environment. It helps to fertilize the plants, basically, as the rains soak it into the ground. Cow poop, industrial cow poop, is an entirely different matter. Now, here at Point Reyes, for example, cows eat literally hundreds of pounds of fodder, on a regular basis, and that gets transformed into poop. And they poop in the fields, but they also poop in the barns. And so at Point Reyes, what happens is the ranchers gather the poop that is in the barns, which is probably where most of them are for various reasons, and they put them into these lagoons, they call them. So you have these lagoons of liquefied manure that are probably like 40 feet deep, and they take the manure that's sludge and put it into trucks during the spring when they go out to fertilize the artificial plants, that the non-native plants that they have planted to feed their cows, like alfalfa and oats and stuff like that, because all the native plants have been pushed out by the non-native plants. The non-native plants tend to really like the nitrogen from the manure. So and there's some astonishing videos of this on the Save Point Reyes National Seashore website that you can see. These trucks go out in the spring and they spray liquid manure over thousands of acres at Point Reyes. And what happens to that manure? It goes into the water table, right? It kills anything that doesn't like manure, which is probably most things, So what we've done, we have befouled our own nests. We have filled a national park that was set up for the enjoyment of people and to preserve its own natural ecology. We have befouled it with literally hundreds of millions of tons of cow manure, and we have called it good. We've said this is the preservation of a way of life that goes back all of 100 years.
100 years.
100 years. And they say, well, now we have new technologies, we're going to sequester the carbon. Unfortunately, and there are ways to sequester carbon, which is really good. One of them is not to have cows, all right? But their method of sequestering carbon is to spray liquid manure on the fields. They call that a way of managing carbon, which is ludicrous on the face of it. And we don't have time to go into all the science of it. But there's a whole nonprofit industry that's risen in Marin and elsewhere that talks about regenerative ranching and carbon sequestration that is actually bogus. It's like feeding off of people's fears. It's selling them products that are not capable of achieving any substantial reductions in greenhouse gas and carbon emissions as if it could. What they're trying to do is they're trying to save the cattle industry from the righteous rage of the masses, because the more as people learn what agriculture has been doing to us, you know, most recently in the past 100 years, but really for the last 10,000 years, you know,
Corporate agriculture.
corporate agriculture, you know, agriculture that focuses on monocrops, that does not take the indigenous way of bringing all things together in some type of harmony. So you burn grasses in order for grasses to grow and for elk and squirrels to feed, and you know, you look at the environment holistically and not as an extraction point for you know, resources that can be sold for profits, you know. So really we have to take profit out of the whole thing, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, you know, when production for profit came along, uh, uh, um, maybe what, 2000 years ago in a big way, and then took off on steroids during the Industrial Revolution, and now we're seeing, you know, its result, which is endless war and endless destruction of our planet. You know, if we could somehow take profit seeking out of that, I think there's a way out of this, you know. But short of that, we're humans aren't going to be here that much longer. And looking at it from the point of view of the Earth, which has been around for at least 4 billion years, or which might as well be time immemorial, you know, we're just a hiccup in the development of what goes on here. Life has been here a long time. We're not the epitome of life. We're almost like a kind of um, virus on this planet that, you know, its immune system has now been activated.
Grasshoppers. We're like grasshoppers when they come and devastate all the fields. I'm talking, you're listening to Peter Byrne, a journalist who's written a whole series of articles in the Bohemian, but he's written a lot of other articles. I introduced him at the beginning of the show as a journalist. He's writes very long articles, very well researched, scientifically, science background. I mean, this is, if you want to be a journalist, read Peter Byrne's work, study his work. Really, I mean,
Well,
this
thank
is
you.
the essence of journalism, and it always has to begin with research, I think, and an open mind. So I'm very honored and happy to have you here with us. We're talking specifically, believe it or not, we're talking about what's happening in Marin County and with the park at Point Reyes National Seashore, and where there's this battle waging between the cattle, the corporate cattle ranching there, who feels like this is their domain, it's their life, their history, versus the natural domain of the elks. And you mentioned squirrels and, you know, all the other life there, and what's being done. And what there was, you brought me back the other day. I posted this movie. We just went away for a few days and just leaving our beautiful area here and going up into the Sierra foothills and all of that, where you saw the depth of the drought, rivers, lakes, streams, uh, empty or almost empty. You saw trees dying, plants dying, the parched earth up there, and hardly anybody wearing masks. You know, I felt like I was in another planet, another world, and it was so glad to get back here. But this, and plus the mass consumption of the overgrowing of, whether it was rice or whether it's grazing cattle, but all of that kind of corporate agriculture that's going on. And you see the effects of that, and you can't help but think, as I don't think of the death of humans as much, but I don't think it would be such a bad thing. I think there'll still be other types of humans alive that can help, because there are people who are trying to save the earth and live in balance with it. But in this short amount of time, so the point I was trying to get to quickly here is that I came back and I found this movie, and it's called, I think it's called 4 Seconds. And I posted it on Facebook, and it's looking at the geologic time clock and how long we as humans have been on the earth, and it amounted to 4 seconds.
I know, it's astonishing. Actually, if you go to YouTube, you can find little videos, animations people have made on the life of the universe, which is thought to be like a trillion, 14 trillion, 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 trillion years, which is
Wow.
unfathomable. So we are just, no matter how good we are at stewarding our environment, we're almost unfathomably small quantum blip in the scheme of everything, which means that it's that much more important that we do something with ourselves. I mean, here we are. If we can't restore a national park, are we going to be able to do the whole planet? I don't think so. You know, I mean, we got this Biden in here who's like some kind of, he comes with a long history of corporate fealty, and he's a warmonger and stuff like that. And granted, he's a lot better than the psychotic people that were there before that, and hopefully those people aren't coming back. But if Biden and these people don't do something to make it worth our while to stay here, the Trump people will be back. Those people are 75 million strong, and they're just waiting for Biden to do exactly what he's doing, which is to refuse to do anything meaningful, of real impact, whether it be to get rid of the what do you call it when the Senate has to like vote by 2/3? I forget.
Filibuster.
Filibuster. Yeah. I mean, that would be a no-brainer. I mean, the Republicans would have done it in 2 seconds, right? So we're in a battle to the death with kind of two fundamental movements that have like this ideologies, and the issue of the filibuster is key. If the Democrats don't have the guts to get rid of the filibuster, they're going to be run over by these Republicans, in my opinion.
Well, haven't we also, and what you say is true, but haven't we also run into this point, at least here in the United States? I've never lived anywhere else, but as we were talking about this narcissistic culture, me first, it's all about me or my people, and there is to a large degree the rise of white supremacy, and to save the white culture and anything that, whatever that means to those people, not you, dear listeners, but
Right.
That kind of mindset. I mean, where, as someone said, Nancy Pelosi is in a place where she's playing where people won't play by the rules anymore.
Right. And these are rules that were suspect at best. I mean, this whole thing about freedom, the freedom to do whatever I want, is based on this grotesque sign of social Darwinism. That Darwinism didn't ever say survival of the fittest. Darwinism was actually thought that evolution proceeded by groups taking care of themselves. It didn't have anything to do with individuals being more fit than others, and that's been transformed into this form of survival of the fittest, right? As if there is any such thing as an individual. I mean, that's so crazy. I mean, we're here in a building that probably 25,000 people touch directly one way or another in the production process to make this radio studio possible. We couldn't have built it by ourselves. We can't do anything by ourselves. We couldn't have done any of this without our ancestors. I mean, unfortunately, our culture, our narcissistic culture, it doesn't actually put the same weight on ancestors as indigenous cultures here do, or some Asian cultures. I think it really is important to recognize that we carry with us, since we're 4 billion years old, we carry with us that genetic record of 4 billion years of existence. It takes us back, through when we were shrews to when we were, chronobacteria, chronoflagellates, growing little tails, and we forget, we think we're just like, everything's all about just, we're born, we consume, we die. Actually, well, we're part of a much greater network of life, of which humans are one branch, and we contain within our bodies this history that if we can just slow down and listen to it, we can listen to our own genetic structure and not elevate it into some kind of deterministic thing, but more as just a record that has a story. If we can hear these stories, then maybe we have a chance. And that's why I'm writing these articles. I'm writing these stories about the tulia being used for medical experiments by the Park Service, being literally raped by the insertion of electronic instruments into their vaginas, for example, being chased by helicopters, being euthanized by bullets for testing for a disease that only affects cows. And I use euthanization in a way to say that this is not going on. It's actually murder. They call it euthanization, but euthanization is taking, the life of a creature that is in pain. These creatures that they're killing are pregnant elk. They're going out there and shooting these pregnant elk because the ranchers don't want them in their fields.
You know, it's just so much time. I mean, so little time and so many things to continue talking about. I hope you'll visit us again. But Peter, you're absolutely right. I look at the behind us, the logo of KGOA, which is, the circle of life, the basket, a pomo basket there, the quail tops. And this is designed by pomo artist Eric Wilder, whose grandmother was Mabel McKay.
Oh, wow.
And he comes from an amazing background and comes here. And I can't even think as an indigenous person, I cannot think of the I. It just is not in my nature because I was raised with this. I was raised with it's about us, and what you do affects somebody else, and or maybe how somebody is not in a good mood today, something happened to them at home, and you need to take that into account. I cannot think beyond outside of community. And maybe that's why community radio is so important to me, and this station, as it has helped pull a community together in a lot of ways so that we can know each other.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
I was reading about indigenous people in the Owens Valley down in the southern part of the state. And what would happen was if somebody did something really bad, like stole or maybe, murdered or harmed somebody, the entire group, kind of, we call them hunter gatherers, but whatever, they were nations, they were groups, would come together and talk about what did we do wrong that one of us went and did this thing. Now, imagine if that person did it like 3 or 4 times, that they would, execute them. Like you would get rid of, a limb that got infected or something like that. But the instinctive reaction, I think, that goes back to our very bacterial progenitors is like you said, usness. It's all about the group, and it's the groups can be parsed in some ways where you can make them small or you can make them big. Let's choose now to look in the other direction and make them big, to include all living, people, all living people, and to say, what is it that we have done wrong that our earth is rejecting us this way? And our scientists are telling us what we have done wrong. And our politicians are saying, there's no worry here. This is a lot of fake news. And unfortunately, there is a lot of fake news out there. And a lot of it's put out by, liberals too, like in Marin County. And so when the people that become anti-vaxxers and storm Jared Huffman's meeting, their rage is real. Their concerns are real. Their fears are real in the sense that they feel those things. They feel that they're being attacked because they've been fed disinformation. And, that's why I'm a journalist. I'm trying to find and practice the way of obtaining facts that can be put into a story so that people will see where those facts lead, at least from my point of view, because none of us are objective on this. I don't believe that there is such a thing as completely objective journalism, but there is such a thing as fake news, and there is such a thing as real news. And I want to practice real news. And unfortunately, the corporate media practices mostly fake news. They feed on violence and disaster while they create it.
Absolutely true. And we've talked about this a couple of times in the past couple of weeks about how corporations want, they train you that they want you to buy the stuff, and then they start training you to fear the stuff, to buy other stuff, and then they train you to fear people who are fearing you for buying that stuff. I mean, it's an amazing, horrible cycle. And
then they sell you the cure for the cancer that you got from eating the stuff.
Oh, exactly. Peter, we're just about out of time. I want to remind you that Peter Byrne is currently writing for The Bohemian, this whole series of articles that he brought for us on Earth. Teresa Harlan, who's been here, The Sacrifice of the Thule Elk, Apocalypse Cow. You can go online too.
Website for me is Peter Byrne, PeterByrne.info, and there's a section called Dispatches from Point Reyes, and all these pieces are there.
All right. Thank you, Peter Byrne. It's been a pleasure. And we're going to find some ways to do more of these.
I'd love to.
We
Yeah.
need your voice and appreciate it much. Okay, that's it for Peggy's Place this morning. Thank you, Leanne, out there in the background. I'll get us going. It's time for Native America calling live from Albuquerque, New Mexico.